Are you one of those parents who eagerly awaits the school summer holidays, writing lists of all the exciting outings and activities you're going to do with your kids? Or are you one of those parents whose heart just fills with dread as you think of the 6 long weeks ahead of you? If you are the latter, then this week's podcast is for you, as I share some tips and techniques to hopefully make the school summer holidays a little bit more bearable. Welcome to the SEN Parent Survival Guide podcast. I'm your host, Esther Freeman, and I teach parents the techniques and principles for how my daughter went from 5 or 6 violent meltdowns a day to virtually 0. In this weekly podcast, I will share with you ideas and strategies on how to have a calmer family life. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. So the school summer holidays are fast approaching. For those of you in Scotland, I think they're nearly here, right? And the rest of us, they're really not far away. I don't know how you're feeling, but I'm getting to the frazzled stage. I've had a really difficult week, and at one point I didn't know if I was even going to be able to make this podcast at all. It's been very challenging. So along with some really difficult personal stuff that's been going on for me, my daughter's nighttime nausea has returned, and those of you who have listened to this show before will know that this is something we have suffered from in the past and has actually led to her being sick at night times, and it's all anxiety induced. And if you have listened to this podcast before, you know that we've dealt with it quite successfully with tapping. So if you don't know what tapping is, if you're new to the show and you haven't heard me talk about it before, tapping is a mix of the ancient Chinese tradition of acupuncture with Western psychotherapy. Except in tapping, we don't use needles, we just use our fingers. And we tap on various parts of our body while we recite statements about our fears and our worries. And what this does is it sends a message to the brain and switches off our fight, flight, freeze, fawn center, that survival part of our brain that gets activated when we're under high levels of stress. Now, if you've been to some of my workshops, you will know that I always talk about the need for tapping to be very targeted. So that's why I've used tapping before with my daughter, and we tapped on the anxiety she has around bedtime, and it's been really successful. And I think the reason it's come back is we've got a new set of worries, and I think a lot of it is around the year 6, year 7 transition, which is what she's going through at the moment. So there's a lot of anxieties about leaving primary school, heading to a new school, leaving all her friends behind because she's heading off to a special school, and most of her friends are going to mainstream secondary. So we've been having to work through all those fears and try and desensitize her to it, and it's not an easy process. I mean, tapping is amazing, you get results very quickly, but there's a lot to unpack with her, and at the moment it's all coming out at night time. So on top of my personal stuff, I was last night having to deal with helping her, doing some tapping to help her unpack that stuff, and I finally got her off to sleep. And then our neighbours came back really noisily quite late and woke her up, and I did say a very bad word, and she was just in tears because she couldn't get back to sleep, and I was just trying to help her. We were by that point using all sorts of different just calming activities on top of the tapping, and eventually I did get her back to sleep. It was very late, and then I got an email from our head teacher. My daughter was meant to be doing a transition day today, and the head teacher said, due to staffing issues, my daughter wouldn't be able to attend, and this is the second time this has happened, and I'm a little bit at the end of my tether. So I had these personal issues, I had my daughter's issues, I had the transition failure. I was feeling really overwhelmed, and it really struck me last night that this is the life of a parent of a child with special educational needs and disabilities. It's never just one thing, right? I mean, I've had a fairly smooth ride in over the last few months. There's been things here and there, but this is what it can get like. It's just one thing after another, just layer upon layer of stress. And I just thought, what do I do now? And I thought, well, I do have a toolkit here, and I love tapping for being this sort of friend who is always there. But I just didn't know what to start tapping on. There were so many things. So what I did in the end is I started journaling, and I'm just going to get it all out onto paper. And I wrote for, I don't know, over half an hour. I wrote about 5 pages of just all my fears, all my resentments, everything that was in my head. I tried to get it out on the paper. And then I did some tapping. I did just do a general tapping on overwhelm, because my aim at that point was, it's really late, I just need to get to bed, and I don't want this to be keeping me awake all night. And it worked. It did work. I did manage to get off to sleep. I think if I hadn't done all that work, I would have been just lying there till 3 o'clock in the morning worrying. But it worked enough to get me off to sleep. I am going to have to do a bit more work on it tonight. I will be using tapping again and unpicking some of those different issues that I need to tap on to be quite targeted. Now, if this is all sounding quite familiar to you and you'd like, oh, this sounds like a good tool I'd like to have in my toolkit, then I have some good news for you, because I have some free tapping resources that are available on my website. I will put a link in the show notes where you can get those and give it a go. I know it sounds a bit kooky, but in my workshops, pretty much everyone who has given it a go has seen a reduction in their stress and overwhelm in less than 10 minutes. So give that tapping a go and have it handy for the summer holidays, because you are probably going to need it at some point. It is a big stretch of time for you to be together with your family and children who have very high needs. But I've got some other tips on top of the tapping that will hopefully make the summer a little bit smoother. So the first tip is to do some social stories. One of the biggest challenges I think that children face for the summer holidays, children that have additional needs, neurodivergency and other issues, is the lack of predictability. At school, they may not like school, but it is at least predictable. You get up at the same time every day, you wear the same clothes, you go and see the same people, you sit in the same seats, more or less. You have a timetable which tells you what you're doing throughout the day. Then you get home and maybe you have a club or homework or whatever. There's a predictability and a routine to it, and this provides our kids with a sense of safety. When we hit the school holidays, that all goes out the window. So one thing that we can do to bring a bit of predictability back is these social stories. Now, I'm sure lots of you have come across social stories before, but if you haven't, they're basically a way of breaking down an event or an activity into chunks so that the person with additional needs understands what's going to happen, and there's this predictability to it. So for example, if you were going to do a social story about your holiday, maybe let's say you're going to France, so you might create a sort of like a comic strip where you would say, we are going to France this summer, we will be getting there on the plane. In order to catch the plane, we will go to the airport. These are some things that you will see at the airport, and then you might want to have little pictures of passport control, security, all those kind of things, check-in desks, those kind of things, so they know what they're going to expect. You might want to give them a warning about different sights and sounds and smells that they might come across, especially if they have sensory sensitivity. So it basically explains to them what's going to happen. You can print these out, they can carry them with them. I know some people who every time they went through a stage of the social story, they got the kid to tick it off, and so they knew, right, we've done that, this is what we're doing now, this is what we're doing next. If you would like a little bit of help in creating a social story, there are some templates online. I will put a link to some resources in the show notes to help you. I have found that they really help to reduce stress in my daughter, and they are widely used in the special educational needs community. So why don't you give them a go? Tip number 2 is get yourself a sunflower lanyard. The Sunflower Lanyard scheme has been running for a number of years now and is growing in popularity and recognition. These sunflower lanyards are worn around the neck by people with hidden disabilities, often by children with neurodivergency, but they're increasingly being used by all ages, from, as I say, children to older people with dementia. And the scheme is basically that staff in service providing organisations like supermarkets, airports, visitor attractions are trained on how to support people with hidden disabilities. And it's a kind of symbol without having to go out and say, hello, I'm autistic, or I need some help. They can just wear this sunflower lanyard, and it tells them, it tells everyone who is trained, a little bit like a little secret language. I have found that over the years there is growing recognition and things are really improving. I think as a scheme, it's a really positive one. I found in airports, I have to admit, I've not been abroad since before COVID because it was just too stressful for us. And I found that there was huge discrepancies between different airports. Heathrow, amazing. They were so good. Gatwick, I didn't have a great experience with. I know other people have. Ours wasn't so good. Also, you will find within these institutions different responses because everyone is an individual. They might have all gone on the training, but you know, people are going to take in different things. For example, we went through security. Security was the bit that my daughter struggled with most. I remember once there was this amazing woman who clearly been trained and she was amazing with my daughter, and this other guy just stormed in and started shouting at us to hurry up. You know, that I suspect they'd gone on the same training and one had taken it in and the other hadn't. So similarly with attractions, you can wear them to attractions. Sometimes they'll help you get to the front of a queue so you're not having to wait, or just you can go up to someone and say, I need a quiet space, and they'll know immediately why you're asking that. Again, I found very different experiences. Last weekend we went to the Paddington Bear experience at County Hall in London. They supposedly had been trained through the Sunflower Lanyard scheme. Was not a great experience. Meanwhile, we went to the Harry Potter studio tour. Amazing! They were so great with my daughter. Clearly, they'd had some very thorough training there and they understood what the sunflower lanyard was and how to respond to someone who was wearing one. You can buy the sunflower lanyards online. I will put a link in the show notes where you can get those. I got mine from the airport. I don't know if they still give them out there. As I said, I haven't flown anywhere since before COVID. You can also sometimes get them through your local parent carer forums. So get yourself a sunflower lanyard, whether you're going overseas or just planning on visiting some visitor attractions. I find that they're really worth having. So point number 3 is have a non-routine routine. As I said before, when your kid is in school, they have this very predictable routine. They get up at the same time each morning. They have breakfast at roughly the same time each morning. They brush their teeth, they go out to school, they arrive at school, they do their lessons, they have their lunch, and so on, so on. I try to have a non-routine routine. So I try and avoid staying in bed all morning. I know it's, you know, you're exhausted and you just want a bit of a lie-in, and you know, I do give myself a little bit of a lie-in, but I make a point of getting up at a certain time. Normally I try and make sure I'm out of bed by 8 o'clock, and then we try and have a routine in the morning that is very similar to school. It's obviously a bit more relaxed because we haven't got to get out of the house at a certain time, but I still try and stick to something resembling a routine just to give that sense of safety. If I'm organising activities, I try and organise them around the same time. So I tend to go for around 10 and 11 o'clock because I like to go in the morning because they're often quieter. Attractions are quieter in the morning. And that also means that we're always heading to the same point. We need to be out the house by this point in order to get to the attraction. And then I try and aim to head home. So we're coming home about 3:30, just like we would be doing on a school day. And then she has that kind of late afternoon period as free time to hang out with her friends, just have a little bit of screen time if she wants to. And we may have a little bit of a later dinner and bedtime, but I try and keep into something very similar to what we have at school time without all the pressures of getting to school on time and all those things. And so that leads me on to the next point. As usual, I've completely forgotten what my numbers are. Where are we now? We're number 4, I think. So number 4 is factor into that routine some decompression time. I've talked about this on podcasts before and how there's this myth, well, I guess it's not a myth if you have a neurotypical child. It is probably true that if you do loads of activities and keep them busy all day, they sleep better at night. This is often not the case for neurodivergent children. What happens is they get an overwhelm of sensory, emotional needs. Maybe they've been masking all day because maybe you've been out somewhere with friends or relatives and they've just had to have this mask on all day. And so actually it completely overstimulates them. So I always factor into my day some downtime and I just let her have a tablet during that time. Honestly, just if you need the whole afternoon to be tablet time, just do it. This is where they feel safe. And I don't personally restrict screen time because I try and keep it to a certain part of the day, but at that part of the day I see it as a place where she can unwind, and I think that's really important for our kids. So point number 5 is go with the flow, or don't go with the flow. So this one is very dependent on what your family is like. I saw this question on Facebook where people were saying, what's your tip for the summer holidays? And lots of people were saying, go with the flow. You don't have to be booking tickets to Alton Towers and Legoland and doing all these big things, and just chill out and take each day as it comes. And I totally agree with that. You do not need to be spending vast amounts of money. There is plenty that you can do together with your kids at home. However, from my perspective, if I was taking each day as it comes, it would just cause huge amounts of anxiety for my daughter. What I do is every week at the start of the week, I have a timetable, and my daughter likes to know what we're doing each day. And each day I like to have at least one activity. And that's because I know if I just leave her to her own resources, because she has really poor executive functioning, she just gets, it's kind of like an overwhelm where she says to me, I don't know what to do. I don't know what, I'm bored. I don't know what to do. She starts getting into fights with her friends. And it's a kind of overwhelm because she can't organise herself. So I tend to have these free play moments, but then I have structured moments as well. And this will all be written on a timetable and stuck on our fridge. And sometimes those activities might be something quite big. We've got a couple of quite exciting things I've scheduled in for the holidays, but equally it could be we're going to bake some biscuits today, or we're going to play Minecraft together today. So it doesn't have to be big things. That's what works for my family. We need to have quite a bit of structure and know what we're doing. And I have to say, for my own level of neurodivergence, I need to know what we're doing as well, because I tend to get a little bit panicky if I have everything too free. But I know people who are complete opposite and they hate their lives being planned out like that. So whatever works for you, and as I say, go with the flow or don't go with the flow. What is best for your family? So point number 5 is have your supporter network ready. So who are the people who are going to support you when the shit hits the fan? So when you are something like 4 weeks into the summer holidays and all the gloss and glimmer has worn off and you're just at each other's throats, who is it that you're going to turn to? Maybe it's a friend that you can call up at the end of the day and just say, I just need to offload to someone. Can you listen to me about my day? Maybe it is a friend or family member who can come in and provide some babysitting so you can have a break and get that much needed self-care time. If you don't have anyone who can do that, maybe you can pay someone to come in and do it. You also, depending on the level of stress that your family is experiencing now or is likely to experience over the summer, you need some more professional support out there as well. Maybe you need a parent coach, or maybe you need a therapist. Is your child in therapy at the moment? Do you have a number for them for out of hours contacts in case you have that crisis coming up? Think about who you might need, who you're going to call when things get difficult, and maybe have a range of options. You will know your family best, how bad it's likely to get. If it's getting to a point where your kid might be doing something dangerous or illegal, what is your support network going to be if that happens? And just have that ready. I find it quite useful to do a little spider diagram where I map out who is my support and what I'm going to call on them for. So you might like to try that. Point number 6 is readjust your bedtimes a few weeks before going back to school. So over the summer holidays, it is very usual for bedtimes to start creeping back. I try and keep as close to the regular bedtime as I can, but it's inevitable, especially if you're going away, that bedtimes get later and later and later, and sometimes kids sleep later and later in the mornings. What I would say is, while that's fine to do that, you do need to have a plan for how you're going to bring it back in line. Because if your kid has been regularly getting up at 10 o'clock in the morning, when they go back to school and suddenly need to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, that's going to be a massive wrench. It would be for adults too. It is for all of us. So I would say a week or 2 weeks, however long you need to do it for, gradually bring the bedtimes earlier and the morning times earlier as well. You could do it as little as 15 minutes each day, making sure that you're getting up. Yes, you have to do it too. And making sure that your kid is getting up so that when it is time for that 7 a.m. start back to school, it isn't such a huge wrench. Now, I know this is easier said than done, and I know loads of you out there struggle with bedtimes. I do have another video on how to manage bedtimes, which I will link to at the end of this if that is you. And this brings me on to my next point, which is point number 8, and that is forgive yourself. So if you are struggling with bedtimes, if you've not managed to bring it forward by the time you get back to school, just forgive yourself. I've started writing these letters of forgiveness to myself when things go wrong, and they have 3 parts to them. So the first part is where I acknowledge what went wrong, and I say, I did this and I know that was wrong to do that. The second part is where you forgive yourself and you say, I was trying my best and I made a mistake, and mistakes are allowed. And there is no such thing as a perfect parent, and I strive to be a good enough parent. And then in the third part, you say what you're going to do to make it better. So that might be how you're going to repair your relationship with your child, how you're going to look after yourself so you don't blow up again, how you're going to do things a little bit differently in your family, but most of all, how you're going to accept that sometimes things go wrong. So give that a go. I find it's really helpful. I was a bit reluctant to do it when someone showed me this technique first. I felt a little bit reluctant to do it, but actually it did shift something in me and I did feel better afterwards. So point number 9 is keep a scrapbook of holiday memories. Now I know some of you have heard that and just immediately recoiled at the idea of scrapbooks. I have to admit, I always loved a scrapbook as a kid. Every summer I would keep a scrapbook and I absolutely loved it, and I'm quite a crafty person, so I still love scrapbooking, and I've always encouraged my daughter to do a scrapbook. She's a little bit lukewarm on them. She's definitely not as into them as I am. And you may have a kid who's just not into scrapbooking afterwards, but maybe they're not crafty, but maybe they're more into tech, so maybe you could look up some ways of doing it with tech. Maybe you could build a website, write a blog, do something like that, just to try and focus on the good things that have happened in the summer holidays. Maybe your holiday, your school summer holiday has been really grim. Maybe the police have been called. Maybe things have been smashed and broken. Maybe people have been hurt. Maybe it's been really dark. While you can acknowledge that has happened, try and think of something, no matter how small it is, that has gone well. And sit down with your child and say, I know this has been a tricky holiday, but do you remember when, I don't know, we found that ice cream pile and we had those amazing ice creams? Wasn't that great? Or do you remember when we played that Minecraft game together? Wasn't that fun? Or maybe I remember that joke you told me. That was so funny. This does two things. This increases your parental presence by creating a scrapbook, however you choose to do that scrapbook. It's an activity that you can do together. And it's an activity that celebrates your child and your relationship with them. And it tells them that no matter how dark things get, my love for you is unconditional. And I remember that amongst those bad times, there were good times too. Some people call them glimmers. I know some people don't like that term. I quite like it. That hang on to those glimmers. I've actually started trying to do a glimmer diary where when I've had a bad day, as I talked about at the top of the show, that things have been quite tough over the last few days. So I did last night sit down and put a few things into my glimmer diary of things that actually had gone okay, because it really did feel like the walls were closing in. And it just helps to hold on to those little things to get you through the dark times. And that leads me to my final point, point 10, which is just keep going. No feeling is final. If you are in the middle of the summer holidays and things feel really dark, really grim, please come back to this podcast and just listen again to this section. Whatever you are going through now is not going to last forever. Nothing does. There will be bad times, but those will come to an end, and there will be other good times. And I can't promise that those good times are going to be long, and it might be very soon before you're back on some bad times again, but nothing lasts forever. Keep going. You can do this. I believe in you. So that leads me on to the final section of the show, where we look at things going on in the wider world of special educational needs and disabilities. And I could hardly leave this show without saying, please, this week, this Thursday, go out and vote. If you are looking at the main political parties, and maybe you've watched some of my shows where I've talked about over the last few weeks what's in the manifestos for SEND families, and just think, well, I think they're all looking quite rubbish, quite honestly, just go and vote for an independent candidate. But use your vote. It's really important. We only get to do it once every 5 years or so. So please go out and vote. And there is a movement growing. This week I was reading about the SEND Education Consortium, who have put out their own election manifesto. And the SEND, the Special Education Consortium, is a coalition of different charities and groups who specialise in disabled children. So that includes the Council for Disabled Children, IPSI, who I talked about on a previous show, amazing organisation that support parents with legal challenges. And they have come out with these 3 pledges. So the first one is accountability. So they are calling for more accountability in the sector, particularly from local authorities. And I absolutely agree with this. We have a massive problem at the moment in that we have a legal framework that's actually pretty good, but the problem is that local authorities just ignore it and act unlawfully in so many different ways, denying our children their legal rights. And the consortium is calling for better inspections, better Ofsted inspections. They're calling for better training and resources, and they're calling for a change in culture. And these things are all very admirable. I think they could have gone a bit further. I think we need tougher penalties for when local authorities act unlawfully, because at the moment they just seem to do what the hell they want. And they ignore, I've lost count on how many times I've had to copy and paste bits of the SEND Code of Practice and send it to my SEND officer saying, please can you follow the law? And she just continues to ignore me because there's just no one holding them accountable. So I think there needs to be some kind of mechanism where parents can go to and say, look, I mean, at the moment it's the SEND tribunal, but the local authority doesn't really get penalised. They just get told to follow the law. There's no penalty really for them frequently acting unlawfully. So that's what I think we need to see. On the question of funding, absolutely agree that we need more funding for the sector. Again, I think the consortium could have gone a little bit further. I know some organisations are calling for the deficits that the local authorities have to be just written off, because local authorities have these huge SEND funding deficits. I know my local authorities, it's into millions, tens of millions. I mean, I've lost track. It's huge. And this is why every new parent who comes along asking for an EHCP just meets so much resistance, because they know that every new EHCP that they issue is just going to increase that mounting debt. So if that deficit could simply be written off, I think that act alone would change things quite radically. And their final point is listen to families. Now I have to say to this, it's a bit meh. I mean, haven't we been saying this for years? Isn't this already written in the SEND Code of Practice? Isn't there already sections on your EHCP where they're meant to be listening to you? Don't we already have co-production meetings? This stuff is already always there, but there's this culture where parents are just belittled and dismissed and gaslit, and they're not listening to us. So how are we actually going to make them listen to us? What's actually going to change? There needs to be this massive cultural shift. And you know where they could start? By stop calling me mum. Anyone else hate that? Oh my God, that drives me completely crazy. It's just summed up in that phrase. It's just so much patronising and condescending attitude. I honestly feel like getting a t-shirt that just says, don't call me mum, and wearing it to my annual review meeting, or maybe a badge. So if you would like a badge too, maybe I should make some, hey? So, yeah, let me know. Let me know if you would like a badge, and maybe we can get some made that just say, don't call me mum. So that brings us to the end of this week's show. So remember to check out those free resources. Those free tapping resources. They're going to be really helpful for you to get you through the school holidays. And next week we are going to be looking at other unusual ways to release stress over the summer holidays, because I know a lot of you out there are going to need some resources and tools to help you manage the stress of the summer holidays. And that basically just leads me to say that if you have enjoyed this week's episode, please consider giving it a rating review. preferably a 5-star rating. And the reason I ask this is because it helps to for other people, other families to find us, because it kind of raises us in the algorithm. So see leaving a review as a way of reaching out to another family and making sure that they can get some tips and help to manage their family life. I'll see you next time. I mentioned in that video that I've got some tips on how to get children with autism or other neurodivergencies to sleep. If you'd like to check that video out, just click here.